Hey guys, so we are going on to Chapter 3. Chapter 3 introduces you to social cognition and its four processes of attention, interpretation, judgment, and memory. It then describes cognitive shortcuts that humans use to conserve mental effort and the features of the person and the situation that can impact the tendency to use those shortcuts. So the chapter also is providing it like a discussion of the cognitive we use to enhance and protect our self-esteem, and the factors in the person and the situation that impact our tendencies to use those strategies. So we're going to talk about the strategies that we use to gain like an accurate understanding of ourselves and an understanding of others, and then also how the person and the situation affect the use of those strategies. So the four core processes of social cognition include attention, like I said, interpretation, judgment, and memory. Four core processes. Features of the person and the situation influence what people pay attention to and the impressions they form of themselves and the impression they form of others. So the goal of social cognition really changes as we attempt to adapt to a wide range of social circumstances. Those are my dogs growling and fighting with each other in the background, if you can hear that. So basically, sometimes we have the goal of like generating highly accurate impressions of others and avoiding making like a serious social mistake. And then other times we just want to make the best decision we can with as little effort as possible. So as goals change, we adopt different styles of thought and we attend to and interpret and judge and remember social information differently depending on what our goals are in that situation. Sometimes we want to have accurate information and other times we don't. And we're going to talk about that more in depth. So people have other cognitive shortcuts to choose from as well, including like representativeness heuristic, the availability heuristic, anchoring and adjustment heuristic. So we're going to talk about all those heuristics, which heuristic means shortcut. We'll talk about that more too. So the strategies that people use to enhance and protect their self-image include social comparison, both downward and upward, taking credit for success, minimizing responsibility for failure, magnifying the importance of the things they do well, and minimizing the importance of the things they do poorly, exaggerating their perception of control, how much they are in control or how much others are in control. So our beliefs about the world tell us what to expect from the people and the situations around us. These expectations, however, also influence how we interpret things that an individual does. So expectations, they influence memory, they influence a lot about, well, they influence everything in life. How we perceive ourselves, how we perceive others, what we remember, how we remember it. One significant danger of an inaccurate expectation is that they often lead to behaviors that cause those expectations to come true, and that's what we call self-fulfilling prophecy. So self-fulfilling prophecies are most likely to occur like when the people holding the inaccurate expectations are in control of the situation and they can change things, and the targets of the expectation yield to this control. So the desire for accuracy may lead people to apply a rational attributional logic to understanding like why certain events happen as they did. As people consider the relative contributions of like forces within the person and forces within the situation, we kind of ask whether like a person's behavior was intended and the consequences were foreseeable, whether he or she behaved with free choice or whether they were like coerced or forced into doing certain things. We're also likely to use like a discounting and augmenting principles, and to use information regarding like terms that we're going to talk about: consensus, distinctiveness, and consistency. Okay, so that's basically the summary of the chapter. So let's talk about it in more depth. So the four processes of social cognition. Well, let's define social cognition. Social cognition is the process of thinking about and making sense of oneself and others. So how do you understand who you are? How do you understand the world around you? How do you understand another person? And social cognition is kind of what we do in this class. This is social psychology, so it's all about social cognition. How do we think about our social relationships? How do we analyze people? How do we analyze ourselves? So I mentioned the four core processes of social cognition. So we have attention, interpretation, judgment, and memory. So attention is selecting information. Because our attention is limited, right? Short-term memory, you can only focus on so many things. We can only pay attention to a fraction of the information that is available. So in addition, different people may pay attention to different information in the same situation. So you have two people in the same situation, and one person views things in completely different ways and can reach dramatically different conclusions about what the situation means. So it's like you all know that I have a farm. So if I asked you to go up to and get on one of my horses, you might be completely terrified by the idea. Whereas another person who has horse experience um, and knows how to judge the situation, knows what to pay attention to, the cues, the nonverbal cues that the horses give, they know that that horse is really well behaved. Whereas, there might be a dangerous horse, and the person with experience knows what to pay attention to and says, that horse is dangerous, I shouldn't get on that. And another person might think that it's all fine and dandy, and they end up getting injured. Okay, so we pay attention to different things. I have a doctorate in marital and family therapy, and my specialty is relationships. So when I see a relationship, I see very different things that somebody else might. I actually came from a background, and I'm not just talking about my immediate family, but my entire extended background has like bad relationships. Their marriages suck. Like almost everybody in my family is divorced. So for me, I wasn't willing to even date until I went and got a degree in marital and family therapy, because I wanted to know what made relationships work. Like, can this be successful? How is it successful? And a friend asked me recently, like, has it worked for you? And I would say, yeah, it has, because I've never had a bad relationship before. So now I have met many men in my history that I thought, there's no way I'm going out with you because you're bad news. But it's because I can see the cues. I know what to pay attention to. I know how to analyze the situation. So I pay attention to different things than somebody who has no knowledge of how a good relationship works would pay attention to. Okay, so attention is very important. Then interpretation. How do we give this information that we're paying attention to meaning? Because you might see like a guy is rude to a waiter at a dinner date, and you notice that, and there's a part of you where a red flag pops up, but you don't know what it means. Is it that bad? Does it really reflect on who he is as a person? So how do you interpret that? Now that you've noticed it, how do you interpret it? And a lot of people will make excuses about poor behavior, and that's what keeps them in these bad relationships. So paying attention to something is not enough to understand the social situation. We still need to determine what that information means. So in other words, we must interpret social information, and then we must give it meaning. Most social behavior can be interpreted in multiple ways, and we're likely to reach different conclusions than other people will reach, even when we are paying attention to the same information. I like to talk about cults a lot in this class. So when you meet a cult leader, you notice the charisma. For instance, okay, I was walking through LA, and there was a Scientologist, which is another cult, and he said, "Hi, do you want to take this stress test?" Because that's how they hook you and pull you in, is they offer stress tests, and they're going to counsel you and help you out. And the charisma was just amazing. I never understood how people could get hooked into cults as well as I did interacting with them, because they purposely put the most handsome, charismatic people out on the street to try to draw you in, and I could feel like the draw from this person. It was kind of amazing, but for me that was scary, because I have experience with cults. And I have a doctorate in psychology, basically, and so this is something that I'm educated in, and I understand what Scientology is all about, and so it was kind of a terrifying experience for me. So the interpretation that I put on that situation is very different than the interpretation that other people who get sucked into Scientology would put. All right, I'm talking about this stuff too much, sorry. Cults always have fascinated me. So then the third core process of social cognition is judgment. So how do we use that information in order to form impressions and to make decisions? So now that you've paid attention to it, now that you've hopefully given it the proper meaning, or you've interpreted it wrong and you've given it a wrong meaning, now what judgment call do you make on that? So we pay attention to social information, and we interpret that information, because social situations often require us to make these judgments, or to make important decisions. So we may need to discover how best to tell your teacher that you didn't complete an assignment, or how to deal with a new customer at work, or something like that. I get emails from students all the time about how I didn't turn in this assignment or whatever. And a lot of times they're really rude emails, and I'm like, why would you expect me to break my rules and to help you out, to do you a favor, when you're being rude to me? Like, that doesn't even make any sense. Whereas I had a student once who she didn't answer a question on an exam, but she left such a nice comment that I gave her a point anyways, because it was really sweet. So I'm like, whatever, it's not going to change your grade anyways, but it'll make you feel good because you made me feel good. So yeah, because that's how it works in life, right? You have to use social information appropriately. You have to make the correct judgment calls, and then it might work in your favor. Or if you make the wrong judgment calls, it works against you. Okay, so making decisions with social information is often more difficult than other kinds of decisions because social information is often uncertain, right? You know me through a screen, a few videos, and now you have to decide how best to convince me to let you make up this assignment when my policy is I don't allow assignments to be made up. So how do you handle that situation? Okay. Don't be rude. That's a good start. So as a result of that kind of uncertainty, many of our impressions or judgments are our best guesses, okay, which are often wrong. But okay, and then the fourth one is memory. How do we store the information, or do we store the information for future use? So paying attention to information is necessary if we're going to remember that information. Obviously, you have to shuttle it from your short-term to your long-term memory. So your memories can influence your social judgments by affecting the kinds of information that you pay attention to and how you interpret that information. So if you were raised by an abusive father, then you're going to interpret relationship situations like if you meet a woman, you're going to interpret that situation differently than if you were raised by a father who showed respect to other women. Okay, or if you're a girl, maybe you're going to interpret how a guy treats you differently because you saw your mom being treated poorly, and so you have that memory in your head. If that memory wasn't there, then you probably wouldn't allow that situation to happen, but the memory is there. Okay, so that's going to influence your expectations, it's going to influence what you pay attention to in the future, and so on. All right, so what are the goals of social cognition? If social thought is to be useful, it also has to be flexible. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to spend as much cognitive effort figuring out like a stranger as we would figuring out our romantic partner. Cognitive effort is a limited resource, which I'm sure you feel as you are studying for your exams. You feel like smoke is going to start coming out your ears because you have been focusing so much. You only have so much brain power to use. So we often use strategies that use our brain power as efficiently as possible. We use shortcuts. And as our goals change, our strategies change as well. So for example, if our goal is to be accurate, we'll use different strategies than if our goal is to make a decision and just move on as quickly as possible. And that can often get us into trouble as well, because people can use and abuse those strategies in order to convince you to do X, Y, and Z. So for instance, there was a study that was done where they had students walk down a hallway to a classroom, and in the classroom they were told they were going to do like a memory experiment. I have a sick baby goat. That's what that noise is. So she's crying. You're okay, baby. Sorry. So in the classroom they read a list of negative words like sad, old, tired, fatigued, whatever. And then they actually timed how fast the students walked down that hallway to the classroom and then walked back out. And they noticed when they read the list of negative words, they walked slower than when they read a list of positive words like energetic, happy, and so on. So just that little thing significantly influences our psychology. So when we use shortcuts, it can cause, it's kind of like a vulnerability in our defense. Okay, so yeah, the more accurately we try to assess situations, the safer we are. However, that takes so much effort, it's not always possible. So we like to conserve our mental effort. We don't usually encounter people in social situations like at a slow pace, can't speak, at a slow pace, or like in a linear fashion. Poor baby. So it's not possible to pay attention and process all of the information that's available to us at any moment. So we need cognitive strategies that help us to make effective decisions with as little effort as possible. We need simple ways of understanding the world. We need to free up resources, and then so that we can use those resources when it is needed. However, again, the problem comes when it's needed and you don't realize it and you're not putting the effort into it. And that's how you can get sucked into a cult, or how used car salesman can convince you to buy a more expensive car. Like for instance, if you go to the car place, they'll usually ask you like, what is your budget? And so you'll say, my budget's 20,000. And so they'll say, okay, um, so if your budget's 20,000, what's your limit? Well, your limit was 20,000, but because they said it that way, most people will say, well, I could probably go up to 23,000. And so now they've just got another $3,000 out of you, and they'll keep working at you and probably try to get a little bit more. So these mental shortcuts can cause a lot of problems for us, but it's not always possible to put in that much cognitive effort in every situation. So that's why it can be used against you. However, if you do know these shortcuts, if you do know the problems and the vulnerabilities in your cognition, then you can protect yourself from it a lot more. So now when you go and buy a car, the car salesman says, what's your limit? You'll say, well, I just told you my limit. My budget's 20,000, and you won't be suckered into that. All right, so let's talk more about expectations. Our beliefs about the world function as expectations. In other words, our beliefs lead us to expect certain things are going to happen in certain situations, and for certain others, people to do certain things. So we have these expectations, and we quickly call on these expectations to make general decisions about people and situations. For example, if we learn that a classmate is like a president of a chess club, we assume we can make quite a few inferences about him from this knowledge. So for instance, if I ask you, this guy, Richard, likes to play tennis, he likes to read nonfiction books, and he listens to NPR radio. Is he a professor or is he a truck driver? Chances are you're going to say professor. However, there's very few professors in the world compared to other professions, compared to truck drivers. There's a lot more truck drivers in the world than professors. So chances are actually that this guy's more likely to be a truck driver who just happens to like tennis and read nonfiction books and listen to NPR. There are truck drivers out there who do that. But we have certain expectations about how people behave, and so even though statistically the guy's more likely to be a truck driver, everybody will still answer that by saying professor. So it also appears that we remember people and events better when they meet our expectations than when they don't. So when our expectations are accurate, they allow us to make correct decisions, to make them efficiently as possible, and our brain doesn't like when those expectations are crossed, when they're not met. So when somebody defies expectations, your brain's kind of like, that makes me really uncomfortable, and sometimes let's not even put that into memory because we don't like that, which can cause problems for you. This also happens when there's contradictory knowledge. Something contradicts something you believe or something you think you know, and your brain just is like, let's just not think about that. Let's ignore that. So, poor little girl. She doesn't feel good. All right. So self-fulfilling prophecy. So a sociologist named Robert Merton back in the 40s introduced this concept of self-fulfilling prophecy. And this is a situation in which an initially inaccurate expectation leads to actions that cause the expectations to become true. Okay, so we had this expectation, it was a wrong expectation, but we do something that turns that expectation true, makes it true. Self-fulfilling prophecies are more likely to occur when the people holding these erroneous expectations control the social encounter. I mentioned this earlier. So if you believe something wrong and you're in control of the situation, then you're much more likely to be able to make that expectation true. And then it also helps when the target of the expectations defer to the control. So they're willing to change. So for instance, let's say you are dating a really weak-willed man. He's kind of a jerk, and he's willing to give control of his life away to other people, and you believe that he's going to become a cheater. Chances are that will become correct. Now, initially, that may not have been an accurate expectation. Maybe he wasn't a cheater. Maybe he never cheated before. But then you start pushing away, you start acting in certain ways that are more likely to cause somebody to have an affair. And then because the guy doesn't really have good control of himself and his life, then he gives in. Whereas a stronger man with stronger values and a stronger character, no matter what you did, he wouldn't have an affair. Okay? So, yeah. All right. So clearly self-fulfilling prophecies can cause a bias and then can reinforce that bias, like prejudice and discrimination and so on. I believe this, so I'm going to act in a certain way in order to create that into truth. Okay? And that happens many times. In cults, it's every cult does this. I was going to say it's very common, but it's 100% of the time. A cult will tell you, as a member, that your family is out to get you. They're going to attack you spiritually, physically. They're going to hurt you spiritually or physically. They might try to kidnap you away from the cult, and they give you this phobia of cults so that you begin to believe that your family is out to hurt you and not to help you. Okay, so, but that's not true. I've never been in a situation where the family of a cult member wanted what was bad for their family member. They're all concerned. They all want the best for them. So then the cult member starts to act out against their family. They start to treat them bad, they cut them off, and eventually many times they turn their family against them. And their family's like, well, screw you then if you're going to act that way. We'll stop trying to help you. So that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. They had an erroneous expectation, but they acted in a way where they turned that expectation into the truth. They fulfilled their prophecy. All right, when we see individuals engage in behaviors, we're motivated to figure out why they have behaved that way. Why did Jeffrey Dahmer do what he did? That was your video from last week. When we are motivated to be accurate with our impressions, we must use that information about the person and the situation in an honest way where we're willing to contradict our previous beliefs and so on. Our goal is accuracy. If, however, we wish to conserve mental effort, or we're not highly motivated to be accurate, we're more likely to assume that the behavior of another person is consistent with his or her personality. Okay, so in other words, we're likely to believe that kind of like what we see is what we get. For example, if someone acts aggressively, we're likely to assume they're acting that way because they are an aggressive person. They're a jerk, and so they're acting in a jerky manner. If you see somebody driving down the road and they're speeding past you, then, you know, what do you say about them? Usually it's not nice. But was it really who that person is, or was it maybe they have like a pregnant woman in labor in the car, and so they're speeding down to the hospital as fast as they can? So is it situational, or is it internal in the person? So our initial impression of another is likely to be what we call a dispositional inference, or a judgment that a person's behavior has been caused by an aspect of that person's personality. So dispositional inference is it's your personality that caused you to behave that way. When that's not always the case, many times it's a situational issue and it has nothing to do with the person's personality at all. Okay, dispositional inference. Because the behavior of others is so obvious, we often underestimate the importance of these situational forces in determining the actions of others, right? And so our shortcut is the dispositional inference. However, correspondence bias is the tendency for observers to overestimate the causal influence of personality factors on behavior and to underestimate the causal role of the situational influences. So we are biased towards a dispositional inference. We're biased towards blaming a person's personality, and we call this bias correspondence bias. The tendency of correspondence bias is so common and pervasive, like everybody does it, that it has been called the fundamental attribution error, which hopefully you remember from Psych 101. There's a tendency for individuals to judge their own behaviors as caused by situational forces, but the behaviors of others are caused by their personalities. Okay, so we kind of excuse our own behavior because of the situation, but everybody else's, it's because of who they are. Okay. Culture plays a role in this. Cultural differences help to determine the type of attributions that we use, that we make for the behaviors of others. So people in individualistic cultures like ours, they're more likely to focus on aspects of the person in explaining why he or she acted in a particular manner. But on the other hand, people from a collectivistic culture are much more likely to focus on aspects of the situation, such as cultural norms, social pressures, etc. Now, neither one is necessarily right or wrong. Sometimes people act that way because they are a jerk, because it is their personality. Many times it's because of their personality. However, many times it's also because of the situation. So like when you're analyzing Jeffrey Dahmer, was it something in him that caused him to behave in such an evil manner, or was it his situation? And in that documentary, you saw a lot of kind of back and forth between who he was and how he was raised, what happened to him in school, being bullied, and so on. Does being bullied, that situation, cause these behaviors? And we do know that being bullied does cause aggressiveness in other people. I'm going to show you a video about an experiment with hamsters where they raised a hamster in a cage with a larger hamster, larger, more aggressive hamster, and they wanted to see what happened. And what they found was that hamster that had basically been bullied, when he was put in a cage with a hamster his size or smaller, he became a bully. He became more aggressive. So the situation definitely does affect things.